Story of Naima. A name is special to the soul as it connects the spirit to its divine purpose. Naima's origin is Arabic, meaning content, happy, which is from Naima, to live in comfort, to be worry-free. For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. Psalms chapter 139, verses 13 through 14. Chapter 1, Detroit, 1966. Every soul has been given an assignment before the foundation of the earth. Sometimes an assignment can entail different phases of unfortunate circumstances. I became entangled with evil and negativity that showed up in my life through a spirit of rage. I had no idea for a long time that the Lord had predestined the steps I would take before my existence. The angels were preparing for the plans that God had bestowed upon my life. A chorus of sparrows flew towards the east as the wind blew. It was early spring of '66 when I was born into the lives of Bunny Harris and Jonathan A. Wakefield Jr. of Detroit, known as the Motor City. When I was a little girl, my father would tell me stories about my infancy. I remember listening to him tell of the time when my mother left me at the hospital because she did not want me. As soon as my father heard the news, he came running to my rescue. Another time, after arriving home to a cold house, my parents placed me inside a blanket and put me in front of the heater vent. While they both drifted into a deep sleep, the heater burned me to the point that I awakened them with the screams of an innocent soul. I was burned on my left thigh, causing swelling around the size of an orange. My father immediately put some compression on my leg to take some of the swelling away and then rushed me to the hospital. I cannot remember the pain, and for that I thank God. However, I am always reminded of this story. When I look at my thigh, I am still very self-conscious of it, especially when I wear shorts. My father and mother apparently could not work things out to remain together, so my father eventually left. However, I remember him coming to visit from time to time. My two older brothers lived with us at this time, and my mother treated my brother Lionel like a charm. Rocky, the oldest, and I did not get the same treatment. I remember my mother calling me names like heifer and wench, which hurt my feelings. I always tried to stay in my brother's shadows because I was afraid to be alone with her. My father eventually told me that my mother did not want any girls. I vaguely remember the conversation. She resented being pregnant, that she even lit a cigarette to her stomach to cause physical pain to herself. While he expressed my mother's behavior, I could hear her voice how she would criticize his trifling ways. Somehow I believed that he wanted me to resent her. When I turned 5 years old, I started kindergarten. I would walk to school with Lionel every day, and we would stop off at a particular bar on our way to beg for money from all kinds of strangers. Then we would run to the candy store to buy now and laters, skins, cakes, and pop. I have no idea what time we'd get to school, but Lionel was always responsible for me, and he knew that I depended on him. Sometimes he would abuse that power and tease me by threatening to run off, so I learned quickly to find ways to please him, like offering my dinner at supper time. He only wanted my chicken or the meat on my plate. I don't recall seeing my mother work, but she was always out attending to business. When Daddy came to visit, we'd be so happy because he would bring us goodies and give us money. When he put me on his lap, I would kiss and hug him until his rough beard scratched my face. I would try to do what my mother and brothers told me in between my father's visits. When Rocky babysat us, he'd get into fights with Lionel, and one of them always ended up with a bloody nose. Lionel and I suffered severe abuse from Rocky. He made us drink buttermilk, which I didn't like anyway, from a dirty metal pipe, and then yelled at us. The taste was awful and disgusting. Lionel and I were tormented because he was always pulling pranks and laughing afterward. But Rocky had a weakness, his stuttering problem. Nonetheless, when he was mean to us, we teased him. That was our way of making him feel bad. One day, I realized that we all had different last names, but Lionel's was the same as Daddy's. My mother told me then that my father wasn't Jonathan, the man I'd adored growing up, but Henry Davis. I recall seeing another man visiting when I was younger. Still, I never called him Daddy or remembered showing him any affection. He never talked to me or bought me anything. My brothers adored Jonathan and called him Daddy, which was why I saw him as my father too. He didn't treat us differently. He embraced all of us with jokes, love, and goodies. Sometime after Jonathan left, my mother's brother, Sammy, came to live with us for a little while. It didn't last very long because he had a mental problem. Although my mother did try to get along with him, they fought a lot. One day we came home to find that Sammy had cut up our mattresses and ransacked everything. He had a gun in his possession and we were afraid of him. However, he never mistreated me and I felt a special bond because we shared the same birthday. Eventually, the police came out to arrest him. When he was incarcerated, we moved because my mother feared he'd come back to harm us. After leaving our house on Cass Street, we bounced from hotels to motels until my mother felt safe. Then she met Raymond Ham. Raymond worked at Ford Motor Company and had a poodle named Coco. During the time my mother spent dating him, things got serious. They got married and bought a house on the east side of Detroit on Prairie Street. In between these various men, when my mother had it hard, she would let us visit our paternal grandparents to see Jonathan for the summers. We fit in because Jonathan had 12 brothers and sisters, and they had a lot of kids and lived out in the country in Clinton Township off a dirt road. Being there made my brothers and I feel very safe and loved. Once the summer ended, my mother would come to pick us up, all dressed up, looking nice and very excited to see us. She always had a can of Coke 45 beer in her hand. My grandfather was a minister, and he didn't allow people to act out of line or be disrespectful. However, my mother would talk a whole lot of nonsense and brag. She would cuss someone out if they said anything unpleasant to her or gave her a funny look. My parents never seemed to exhibit a genuine love for each other. They never saw eye to eye on anything that I could recall. I later found out that my mother had been accused of stealing Jonathan from her sister, Aunt Kimmy. Aunt Kimmy had been dating Jonathan at the time my mother started sleeping with him. He would sneak my mother out of the house and ride her around and have sex with her. He showed her the fast life, and she ended up pregnant with Rocky and dropped out of high school. It caused a lot of confusion and fighting for years between my mother and her sister, and hate grew between them. After my mother and Raymond were married and moved into our new home, we were somewhat happy. Our lives did change while living on Prairie Street. I met a cool friend named Marla. She was cute and very nice to me. My mother gave me a birthday party when I turned 8 years old, and I invited the friends we had made in school and the neighbors we had gotten to know across the street. I enjoyed dancing the most, and I will never forget dancing the frog to the song Kung Fu Fighting. On my birthday, I had all kinds of food and desserts. It was a perfect day in my life. My stepfather was a chef at heart. He did all the cooking in our home from the time we started living with him. We had a 2-bedroom house, and I shared the second room with my brothers. Sometimes I would sleepwalk and go outside and stand on the porch. It was dangerous, but I couldn't control it. I also remember peeing in the bed and my mother fussing and calling me names. I felt terrible, but I was afraid of the dark after the house settled, mainly of having to crawl out of bed and go to the bathroom during the night. I grew out of that fast. My mother and Raymond seemed happy together at first, but soon they started arguing, really going at each other's throats. Their routine was to go to the liquor store on payday. They would drink Crown Royal and talk. Then the next thing you knew, they were cussing each other out. Things started to change in our happy little home, and whatever was causing this unhappiness seemed to progress. My brothers and I learned to stay out of their way. We got used to them fighting like this and were scared and unhappy because we never knew what we were coming home to. Rocky was a teenager at the time, and he got so discouraged that he wouldn't even come home most nights. He found a girlfriend and made some new friends to hang out. He started bringing home new stuff too, and we had no idea that it was stolen. Lionel was trying to find a way out, and I was always in my room or on the porch. When the fighting started, I was too scared to go inside the house. Raymond had been in the army where he had learned culinary skills and how to use a machine gun. Besides, he was an alcoholic and indulged in drinking heavily on the weekends. He had a dangerous temper when he got upset with my mother. She would provoke him by accusing him of cheating and lying and demanding all his money. She even accused him of looking at me perverted. Raymond believed my mother was ill because of her behavior when she was intoxicated. She loved to argue and had to have the last word, and then the violence would start. He could cook some mean chop suey and create other meals out of leftovers. He was a fabulous cook. He never messed up a meal. Since he came into our lives, we had been exposed to all different types of foods. We did appreciate him in a lot of ways because he provided us a home and new clothes for school. My mother could not have done this without a man's help. Back then, it was harder to be a single parent. She just never seemed happy for any length of time. However, we made it through the school year. I remember the last day of school, my mother washed my hair and rolled it up for me. Then Lionel and I went outside to play with our friends. We were excited to be out of school and looking forward to sleeping in late during the summer. My mom and Raymond were sitting on the porch drinking and talking. The street lights came on as it started to get dark, so we didn't play too far away from the front yard. Then I heard Raymond tell my mom to stop talking to him in a loud and angry tone. However, she would not stop talking back, and soon the neighbors could hear them. As I ran across the street to get closer to my mother and see what was happening, she ran fast and jumped off the porch, screaming at us to get in the car. We were terrified because we didn't know what was going on. Rocky ran down the street in the direction of his girlfriend's house. I got in the car on the passenger side, and Lionel dove into the back seat behind my mom. She was trying to find the right key to put into the ignition. She started panicking and crying, and as I looked up at our house, I saw Raymond come back outside with his machine gun in his hands. He pulled the trigger. I remember seeing flashes of fire coming straight at us. I heard screams, screeching tires, and bang-bang noises. I huddled the seat while the car took off. My mother stopped at the corner to call our names to see if we could respond, and we answered her crying. We went to the hospital because he hit my mother in the head with his fist. She had to get stitches on the top of her head. Shortly after she was released from the hospital, we stayed at a hotel. Somehow we ended up coming back home to Raymond. We were all pretty terrified. Eventually, we got the car door fixed where the bullet holes were, but I never felt safe or the same. Rocky got word to come back home too. By this time, he had started going out to parties and wearing fancy clothes. He was very handsome, and the girls were always flirting with him. I remember him arguing with my mother a majority of the time. They never had any real conversations, come to think of it. Gradually, he stopped spending time at home with us after his babysitting days ended, mainly because of the fighting. Eventually, school started back. I remember asking my mother if she would fix my hair on picture day. She said she would get up and press my hair, but when the day came, she didn't get out of bed. I was determined to have my picture taken anyway. I put on a rust-colored two-piece pantsuit and went to school with my hair looking a mess. The photographer gave me a comb, which didn't do much, but that didn't stop me from taking my picture. When pictures came back, my classmates teased me because my mother did not comb my hair and too much Vaseline was on my face. My mother was never pleased with that picture. Finally, my mother broke the news that we were going to move into a bigger house. I guess she and Raymond felt embarrassed after sobering up because of their reputation in the neighborhood. Mom said I was going to have my own bedroom this time. I was very excited about it. We got our things packed and moved into our new home in 1974. We had a 4-bedroom house on Atkins Street with an upstairs, an attic, and a basement. After we moved, my mother got a job doing something in the medical field, although she didn't hold on to it long. My stepfather was indeed the breadwinner. A neighbor told us about an old couple who had lived in our house previously, had gotten robbed one evening. The husband was murdered in the home and his blood had stained the walls. After his death, people believed that his spirit haunted the house. It petrified me because I thought there was some truth to this story. It explains some of the noises and weird things that happened while we lived there. Sometimes Coco, Raymond's dog, would bark and scratch at the walls in a rage. He had never behaved like this at the other house. We often heard dishes rattling downstairs while we were upstairs asleep, and one night the noise got so loud that it woke my mother up. She made Rocky go with her to see where the noise was coming from in the house. They checked the doors, walked through the basement, and discovered the dishes were moved around in the dish rack. While living on Atkins Street, my life was like a fairy tale, or so I thought at first. In the beginning, I was excited about having my own bedroom, which was the first room at the top of the stairs. Then I heard about the old man's ghost, and whenever Coco, who slept in my room on the floor near my bed, would bark, I'd panic. There was never anything visible in the room, however, or any shadows. I used to get so uptight on the weekends because my brothers would spend the night away with their friends. However, the older I got, the more I was stuck at home. My mother had a leash around my neck. I could not even go down the street to visit different girlfriends. She never believed in women being friends. When I would pout, she'd get worked up and say, "Heifer, you better listen to me or I will whoop your butt." My mother tried to instill fear in me about desiring to have friends. She was so against it, and in time I would find out why. I believe now that she tried to protect me, but her way of communicating this to me was harsh. So I learned to create an imaginary life in my room. My favorite toys to play with were Barbie and Ken dolls and my record player. Sometimes I'd play for hours, but something was missing, and that was a playmate. When I wasn't crying, I would read, write short stories, and journal in my diary. I didn't play much with my dolls or watch a lot of TV, although my mother and Raymond were now sober. The fighting still went on in our home, and the weekends were never happy times. I had a lot of fears living with my mother and stepfather. As I got older, my mother got even lazier about combing my hair and making sure my clothes were clean. I wore repeats 2 and 3 times a week, and I got teased a lot. No one ever told me I was pretty, so I never thought of myself as being cute. I started doing my hair, and though I didn't do an awful job, my hair started to fall out. I think I was combing it too much. My mother never believed in putting any ponytails or barrettes in my hair. Her favorite hairstyle on me was an afro, which I hated, and I thought it made me look like a tomboy. I remember one day Raymond said he thought that I was a little boy. It brought tears to my eyes. My mother would bicker and accuse Raymond of looking at me in the wrong way. She accused him of it often, fabricating lies about this issue and making everybody feel uncomfortable living together. None of her accusations were right, but it still made me uncomfortable when I was left alone with him. I was always worried about my mother hurting me because of her insecurities around my stepfather. She went to the extreme with this jealousy. Whenever I wanted to be a part of something at school, I knew I had to ask first. I always wanted to join in school activities, and once I asked my mother for money to play the clarinet in the band, she told me we didn't have enough money, and generally she never encouraged me to do anything positive in school. She was a stickler about me bringing home a good report card. In the second grade, I brought home D's and F's on my report card, and I knew I was going to get it. So when I got home, I skipped dinner and went to bed. I heard my mother congratulating my brothers on their grades, and then she called me. All I remembered was my hind part burning from the extension cord. Lionel was 11 and Rocky was, I believe, 15. I was around 9 years old. One evening, we heard my mother and stepfather fighting downstairs, throwing dishes, moving furniture, and calling each other names. My brothers and I stayed together in Rocky's room, which was upstairs in the far back. It had a balcony with stairs that led to the backyard. Lionel and I were shaking and crying because we didn't know what to do. Rocky pulled out the Bible and read to us, trying to comfort us by saying, "If it isn't your time to die, then God won't take you." Then we heard our mother screaming and falling as she tried to come up the stairs. When she called my name, Naima, I panicked. I was afraid to answer her, even when she started cussing and demanding that I come to her. Rocky said, "You better go." He unlocked the bedroom door to let me out. I went to the edge of the stairs. My mother saw my shadow and said, "Come here, heifer." When I went to her, she grabbed me and held me in front of her. We were standing halfway up the stairs on the landing, and Raymond was standing downstairs in the middle of the dining room, aiming his machine gun at us. Then he pulled the trigger. I could see the fire from the bullets coming straight at us. My mother and I screamed for him to stop. The bullets passed by us and ricocheted into the ceiling above our heads. My mother and I ran upstairs to Rocky's room and jumped off the balcony to get outside alive. We caught a cab and stayed at a hotel for a day until things cooled off. Days went by before the damage from the bullet holes was fixed. Rocky began to speak up, arguing more and rebelling against our mother. He told her that we were tired of living like this, sick of the fighting and her putting us in jeopardy. He was trying to convince her to leave Raymond. She didn't want to listen, but somebody told our schools about the environment we were living. The schools started intervening in our home, and my mother knew it was time to make a change. Another nasty fight happened one night, and my mother called the police to warn them that she would shoot Raymond in self-defense if he came home and tried to harm us. I have no idea what they said to her, but she told us to wait in Rocky's room after she hung up the phone. When Raymond got home, he tried to use his keys to get inside the house, but my mother yelled through the door for him to leave us alone. He said, "Bunny, I'm going to kill you when I get in." That's when she realized that he was breaking down the glass door. She ran upstairs and made us escape through the balcony again. We stayed at another hotel, missing school for a few days. During the fighting between our mother and stepfather, our grades were dropping, even though we wanted to be at school because it was a safe place. Shortly after that night, my mother asked if we wanted to go live in a home or live together with our pappy's parents. We agreed to live with our grandparents. Our mother and grandparents went to court to relinquish her rights so they could finish raising us. During the court process, my last name was changed to Wakefield, along with Rocky's. As I gathered my belongings, I was sad and afraid because I knew that my mother didn't want to give us away. I felt she believed that this would be final. I could feel her pain and sense her tears as the days drew near. On the inside, I felt relief, knowing that my brothers and I would be safe together, no matter what happened next. We started packing immediately and were dropped off in Mount Clemens.